get a lot of stuff sent to us for Work in Mind from architects primarily, who will tell me with, lots of lovely PR babble and fluff about their superb project. And they will tell me in all the same language, it was delivered with, well-being aspirations and objectives in mind. Okay, well, let's just push on that. So I'm going to ask you some questions now, Mr. Architect, Miss Architect. And, I ask for the numbers and they can never tell me anything other than some anecdotal evidence, what the impact was.
Hi, and welcome to Thrivalism, Interactions podcast focused on the art of thriving, flourishing and evolving under any conditions. This week, we've recorded a conversation between Deborah Wilder, our Head of Workplace Research and Strategy, and Joanna Watchman. Joanna is a bit of a renaissance woman, being founder of Content Comms, a communication agency which uses content to help carbon-conscious businesses connect with customers, and also Work in Mind, an organisation dedicated to creating better, healthier buildings that support physical and mental health. She's also a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, an organisation that has operated at the forefront of significant social impact for nearly 20 years. All of that might give you a clue that Joanna is passionate about the built environment and its impact on our lives, with a lot of strong opinions and clear ideas about what we should be focusing on right now if we want to create workspaces in which we can all thrive. It's a great conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Jo. Thanks very much for joining us today.
You are very welcome. You're very welcome.
So you've spent 25 years thinking about the impact our environment has on well-being and lifestyle. Mm-hmm. What was it that first got you interested in that area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good topic, isn't it? So sustainability, I think, has only been a thing, really, for probably 15 of those 20 years. And I think, all of that time ago when I kind of started, the really big thing was, how do you make more of stuff? Then it became, how do you make more stuff efficiently? Then it became, how do you use technology to look at human impacts? And the point at which that became a big thing for me was looking at smart home technology. And how do you use, lighting, building controls, all those things in homes to kind of, really deliver on human goals, human benefits. And out of that, I guess, the whole kind of well-being thing has just grown and grown and grown. And I think it's part of, sustainability is not just about energy and environment, it's about people, isn't it?
Yeah. And
the whole thing finally kind of like knits together. So it's a bit of a long answer, but there's something in there for you, Deb.
Yeah, no, the long answers are great. So how have you seen conversations changed in that time?
Well, I think that people didn't enter into the conversation in my world. I come from a technology world. My background is technology marketing, which you may or may not know. And, all that time ago, nobody was interested in people. So you might run a factory or you might run a building and you might think about how you do that efficiently or how you monitor the systems and the way it runs. Nobody would think about how that impacts on the P word, the people word. So I think there is no doubt that people now are at the centre of everything, whether you're running a factory making bricks, and I'm a client that does that in my day job, or whether you're running a building. How people interact in that building, how they use the building, how they use space, how they use technology, how technology affects them. Why are we doing this stuff? It's not just about energy. It's not just about efficiency and management. It's about people and performance and productivity, I think.
Yeah. I know we're only a few minutes in, but how has the pandemic changed that, or how will it change it?
I mean, I think that this is... A lot of people tell me that the pandemic has just accelerated stuff that was already happening. That's fine. I think that's a very anodyne response. My view is that it will radically shift how we see buildings. And I know that this isn't necessarily an interaction thing, but I think together, we have a vested interest in buildings kind of running well, don't we? How do we know that buildings are safe to be in? Do you know? I mean, how do I know? I don't know.
No, we make assumptions about these things, don't we?
We make assumptions, and I don't think that's okay. And I read a really good article the other day, which was it was a scientific paper in the journal Science, which you probably would know.
Yeah.
And it was written by 39 academics and engineers and scientists. A lot of them, they're all over the world, a lot of them in the States. And it was looking at air quality in buildings, okay, so indoor air quality. And it made the point, which was really valuable. If you have a building and you are in charge of building services, you look at water, don't you? So you run your hot flush through so you don't get Legionella and stuff like that. Why is nobody looking at buildings from an air perspective? Because air impacts on our health, productivity, cognition. If CO2 levels are too high, none of us can concentrate. I mean, why has nobody looked at that? So at least the pandemic, if you're going to look at silver linings, the pandemic will deliver, I think, much more kind of scrutiny of how buildings are run and operated. And I think from a design perspective, which is far more kind of, I guess, where, you and your colleagues are interested, I think it will allow us to rethink how we use buildings. I think my concern, if I'm being provocative, and you can challenge me on
Go
that,
for it.
all right, is that I worry that there's too much emphasis on how buildings are laid out in terms of design. So, less density, all that, I would call it slightly soft stuff. But we have buildings that are operated and run inadequately in some cases. And I think that there has to be confidence that those things kind of work together. I mean, you will be aware of them and some of the people listening will, but things like the Well Buildings people have got their health and safety rating, which is effectively like like an EPC or a DEC certificate. You rate your building, you certify the building for safety. That would be like a mark of confidence. I mean, I just think transparency and confidence, public confidence, is going to skyrocket. And I put together some editorial the other day for Work in Mind, where I really kind of challenged the readers to ask more questions. Ask more questions of the people that run your buildings. Ask more questions of the people that own your buildings, because public health is at risk. But I think, as I say, with kind of the design side of it, I think it's going to result in some really interesting shifts. But I think that the market tell me, whether or not I agree with it's another matter, the market tell me that these were things that were already happening. And the hybrid working model, does it work? I don't know. You tell me.
We'll go to that in a minute.
Question.
That's just such a massive area of focus for us at the moment. I was just thinking about you mentioned well building, and definitely air quality is there's a big focus on that in there, and we're working with a few clients on helping them achieve that accreditation. Do you think that something about it being invisible? So air quality, we're not focusing on, it's not tangible, it's not visible. So we say to our clients, focus on the fundamentals, on the basics first.
Yeah.
So air, light, thermal comfort. But they're not easy wins for a lot of clients.
Well, don't you think, Deb, that in life, all the things we can't see are the things that are easy to forget about and ignore? So mental health, you can't see it, so nobody knows that it exists. Somebody with a mental health issue looks the same as anybody else, so we don't look at it. And I think the same is true, as you say, with air specifically. To me, it's absolutely the fundamental building block, pillar, whatever annoying word you want to put in there, to kind of good workplace performance. And you've made a point that was actually echoed in this Science journal paper that I read, which is we don't see it, so we don't think it's important. Well, it's unacceptable. And the thing that worries me really, and this may not be music to the ears of some people listening, is that I think that the Americans actually have got this sewn up. They are looking at this. There's a very clever guy called Professor, well, actually he's a doctor, Dr. Joseph Allen at Harvard Medical School, the public health school rather. And, he is looking at this, and he is a very strong voice in the American market, social media, and there's a whole load of them. But they are talking about this, and they're trying to kind of, I think, what's really important is that the British market, and people in your world and the design world, the fit out world, the architects, the interior space people, all of you kind of come together in a holistic way, and I think really absorb what's happening on all sides of the spectrum. I think the supply chain doesn't talk to each other sufficiently, so it should. And the reason that I kind of created Work in Mind, which is another story, if you like, but one of the things I wanted to do was to make sure that all those disparate bits of the supply chain actually had a conversation.
Yeah.
People in your world should understand the challenges of the building services people or the building investors, and the HR directors need to understand what's happening and what's possible from your side. And I think if you knit that together, you get better outcomes, don't you?
Yeah.
But you can't do that if you don't talk. You can't do it if you don't speak and understand.
No. It's interesting. You started off talking about people, and the well-building certification and approach is amazing. And we have got to focus on those things. But you also mentioned, you've mentioned hybrid working. I'm wondering how they're going to fit in. So well-building, it's very much about the practical side. Alongside, maybe we've got these efforts being made to introduce and think about the well-being in our buildings. But alongside that, everybody's introducing hybrid working, and we need to think about the psychological safety and the well-being of those people as well. So I wonder how that's going to
I think
together.
It's such a good question. It's so intelligent. I'm just thinking, how do I answer that? I agree, and I think you've got this thing around home working, haven't you? And how does the home as the workplace and the workspace impact, and how do we know that that's safe? And I think the psychological factors are enormous. I think there's the cycle for me, which may or may not be answering your question, and I apologise if it isn't, but I think for me there's the psychological thing about how we feel when we're in a building. So I would say, like, a good example is if I go into a Chinese restaurant, they always have there's always the lights are on, and they're often very bright. I can't stand eating in bright light.
Yeah.
You want that mood, don't you? Want that feeling. If you go into another space entirely, you might feel more cosseted, more cozy if it was lit differently, coloured differently. And I was thinking about this. I did a webinar with a bunch of designers and specialising in high-end hotel projects about a year ago. And it was on kind of the curative power of colour, which is a great title. And what we were doing was we were talking about, how does colour make you feel differently? And of course, there's various things going on here, aren't there? There's about how do you feel, and there's what's the truth.
Yeah.
So there's perceived, and then there's reality, isn't there? So if we're in spaces that you people like your good selves are involved with in designing, how can we affect, I suppose, is that the right word, the psychology of that response to a space? How do you do that? Do you do that with colour? Do you do it with having a certificate on the wall that says this is safe? I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but somebody needs to have some of these answers. And I think we also, as you say, that the sort of the impacts, I think the real pandemic, I think, is just, we're on, the mental health elements of this. And I think that people don't talk about actually really how they're feeling about all this. And I make a point with my own colleagues and clients and teammates in asking, really, how do you feel about being back in a work space? How do you really feel? And you look at their eyes and you follow them around. What are they looking at? Are they looking at the windows? Are they looking to see if there's a certificate on the wall saying this is okay to be in? What are they doing? And I think, Deb, there's got to be more people like you with your sort of background and the sort of and people in your world who really spend time on helping to really think about that bolstering of a sense of safety and security in an environment. If you want to make people feel safe and cocooned, surely there are things that design can do with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's where the colour thing kind of came in. And I think, but wider than that, we have to look at the other spaces, and how do we kind of encourage people to make their homes feel like, safe spaces to work in, and what does safe mean? Because it's not just about being safe with air and, in the right chair, as I sort of slump in this one, but it's about, am I getting the right space, isn't it? And space in between the things that I'm thinking about, or space in between meetings. So there's psychological factors, I guess you kind of academics would call it, and then there's the other stuff, isn't there? So I don't know. I think it's a big thing, but I'm hearing lots of talk. I don't know what feedback you get, but that the hybrid working model is having, is not necessarily having the impacts that people thought it was going to in a positive way.
Well, it's really early days for it.
I guess it is. Yeah, I guess it is. And I don't know whether we're just in a sort of a phase where, it's just the emperor's new clothes. Might be, mightn't it?
Yeah,
I think things are cyclical, and you're the expert. I'm just the curator in that regard. But you tell me. Do these things, do these workplace patterns just go around in big circles and trends?
Well, I mean, businesses are just getting back to workplace, or just starting to get back. And I think that they'll have a settling in period. There's a lot of anxiety. We interview a lot of clients and key stakeholders, and there's a lot of anxiety amongst people about getting back. There's also things like resentment about working from home. And
do you mean that they resent having to stop that?
Yeah, no. Well, some of them resent having to stop it, and some of them resent having to continue with it as well. I think we're on the cusp of a new social change pandemic.
Yeah, and I think we have to really watch out for that. And I think my concern is that, our companies and their HR and performance teams, are they equipped? I don't mean this in a derogatory way to anybody listening, but are they equipped to spot that? Do we have the skills? Do we know what to look out for? And do we know how to do things which may support that, and how people are really feeling about spaces, and do we give people the flexibility to change their mind? If they decide that actually they've come back to work on a 2-day a week in the workplace, and actually they'd rather switch to 5. Do we have the space? Have we reduced our density ratios and we can't go back? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants flexibility at the moment because there's so much uncertainty. But interesting with just getting back to Wellbeing, on their new version, and I don't know whether this was planned ahead of pandemic or not, but they've got a new section in there on community, which is really important, and I'm really, I'm pleased to see that, because that is going beyond the practical side and the build side, and it is thinking more about bringing people together.
I think it's a really good point. I mean, generally, I make no bones about it. I think it's a very effective and very strong standard, and I think for those that can't afford to go down the well route, there is this thing people call the spirit of well, which I also applaud. But yes, I mean, again, it goes back to your first question and our first discussion, isn't it? You're putting people into the heart of everything. I think it's a very thoughtful standard, because actually with all the different facets of it, I don't think there's a base that it doesn't cover. And obviously there are other standards out there. It's not the only one, but I think it is now a sort of a de facto aspiration on many projects, isn't it?
I mean, for those businesses that can't afford that, and it is quite expensive, not just for the initial outlay, but for the ongoing costs as well. Are you aware of any as good as alternatives that might be slightly less onerous? Well, it's a
good question, really, and one that my answer probably be utterly inadequate on. But I don't know, if I'm honest, what things cost on a sort of that's usually done on a per square metre basis. But my view is, and having spoken to a lot of architects in particular for work in mind when we're doing project-related content, is that some of them are following this idea of spirit of well, which I've sort of mentioned just a minute ago. And that takes the principles, it takes the sort of the similar shared objectives, and it does what they're able to do. Where things fail, okay, and you will love this one, is that when I talk to practices, if I say what post-occupancy evaluation was undertaken. There's just, computer said no sort of thing. There's this enormous drop and it's always because somebody won't pay for it. There's this real excitement around either pursuing something like well or the spirit of it, and then how do we measure it? How do we know it's worked? How do we know that it's valuable?
Do you think they don't want to see the results? We do get this as well. We we engage in quite in-depth workplace research studies before we design and build a project. And then we have encountered clients being hesitant about doing post-occupation evaluation, just on a broader level. Sometimes we feel that they don't want to see those results. They're concerned about them.
Well, you would know what it's like on the coalface. I know what it's like when I start asking questions. And the answer that I invariably get, doesn't matter where I am, can I have the numbers please, is the client wouldn't pay for it. And it's always, and then you push a little harder. Why wouldn't they pay for it? Well, they ran out of money. So, what do you say to that? There's nothing, it's a bit like saying, well, we've just had an extension done at the back of the house and we couldn't afford to do the patio. Oh, great. So it looks rubbish now. I just think there's these things, aren't there, which should be fundamental, and, KPIs and measurement is in everything. I have to do it for my day job. I don't know why that isn't a fundamental element of these projects. I get a lot of stuff sent to us for work in mind from architects primarily, who will tell me with lots of lovely PR babble and fluff about their superb project, and they will tell me in all the same language, oh, it was delivered with well-being aspirations and objectives in mind. Okay, well, let's just push on that. So I'm going to ask you some questions now, Mr. Architect, Miss Architect. And, I ask for the numbers and they can never tell me anything other than some anecdotal evidence, what the impact was. So how do we make more of these great buildings if we can't put the numbers in place? I think, where it could get really interesting is if you were to talk maybe to HR teams. What's your staff turnover been in your workspace? I read some research that said that I think Oxford University calculated a 30,000 quid per head cost associated with somebody leaving the business, a business, and having to re-recruit. Now that's an average cost. Of course, if you've got high-flying jet setters, it's going to be a bigger number, isn't it?
Yeah. But
you start to escalate that in a business, and if your staff turnover is rubbish because you've got a ghastly place to work, unpleasant culture, the model of working doesn't work, these are big numbers, aren't they? Particularly for any business, actually. So maybe some of the data, maybe some of that is sitting in HR teams. I'm a great fan of talking to HR professionals, actually. And interestingly, with Work in Mind, one of the things that we've done, if you look on it, dear listeners, is you can see we've actually organised the content so that it sits under, you can browse by role, and we've set aside some of the content so it is specifically relevant to the HR professionals, because they are fundamental in all of this. They hold the data.
Yeah.
It's their job to ensure a happy workforce, isn't it? They need to be kind of totally integrated with other functions in the business and the building side, so that this kind of holistically works together. I would argue that this whole kind of well-being thing, healthy buildings thing, the magazines and the media and the channels that should be pushing this more than anything should be things like, HR Director or Training Journal or, People and Performance magazine, whatever. That is absolutely fundamental to this, really. And they should talk to the architects, they should talk to people like yourselves, interaction. Those are the conversations that should be at the heart of this, really.
this is leading me to think about one of my sort of passionate things, Chief Workplace Officer.
Yeah.
And actually with bringing in sort of thinking about well-buildings, well-being, the people, the workplace. This was something that was suggested a few years ago. And I've been a bit disappointed in a way that people haven't grabbed this, because when we think about the workplace, it's thought of from a facilities point of view, or from an attraction and retention point of view, but it's not thought about from the whole, an holistic angle. And HR is really important in that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think occasionally, don't you sort of see what I would call the glamorous end of the job market will have, occasionally on LinkedIn, I'm sure you see them, but you see those jobs come, but they should be everywhere. It should absolutely be a thing. And my argument, because I realise I'm in a slightly more kind of geeky interests in terms of buildings than maybe you would come from, but together, I think that a facilities manager has more impact on your personal health than your GP. How bad is that? So that facilities manager should be in conversation regularly with the HR team. Or the wellbeing officer, or the chief exec, or whatever, or the architect who's been brought in to deliver on an extension, whatever. Those things should kind of come together, and absolutely, I totally agree with you about the sort of the job title. I think it's interesting because a few years ago, you had things like sort of sustainability directors, and it's a very wishy-washy thing. Nobody really knew what they did. They never had any budget. It was one of those functions that was very ill-defined. So maybe what we need is maybe you need to do a big campaign, Deb. Maybe you need to write a paper on that. We'll cover that for you.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So you've just launched a new website, which is offering support for businesses for thinking about healthy buildings. I've got a quote from it. "The environments we live and work in can have as much influence on our health and well-being as our doctors and lifestyle choices." Now, I love this because you're really putting it out there. Can you give us an example of how an unhealthy working environment could affect our health just as much as smoking, or maybe some timely advice from a doctor?
Can I take you back to, I would like to tell you, and anybody who's still bothering to listen to me at this point, but I'd like to tell you why I set up Work in Mind in the first place, okay?
Yeah.
And I think you might know this, but let's hope somebody out there doesn't. So about 3 years ago, my father had, very late at night, on a weekend night, had 3 TIA strokes. And I was the nominated person to go with my father to Swindon Hospital. There, I've said it, to the accident and emergency room, A&E, whatever you call it, ER, if you're in America and listening, to be with Dad. And we were there for 14 hours in that environment. And it was at that point, on a very dark, very grim night, that I was looking around at everything in that space and wondering why the staff in that space looked as ill as the patients. And I came to the conclusion that they were not just overworked. Yes, it was a busy night, Deb, I get that. They're under immense pressure. It's a very difficult world. But looking at the way that building, which is a fairly modern hospital, PFI built, certainly in the last 20-something years, it was absolutely beggared belief how that space was designed, and the lighting, the acoustics, the stress levels. And it was very interesting just looking at the physical presence of those staff. Not only did they look tired, they looked bodily tired. They didn't look in great condition. This was a night shift. And about 4, 5, 6 times now, my father, who was not in any way doolally, I have to tell you, but he asked me, "What time is it?" And why did he ask me what time was it? Because he couldn't tell, because there was no natural light. There was no natural kind of... And I just thought to myself there and then, I have to do something.
Yeah.
That's why Work in Mind existed a few months later, so I created it, because I wanted something which would mean that designers of hospitals, for example, might talk to people who really understood circadian lighting, or better spatial design, or acoustics, or stress levels and how that impacts performance. All those things come together, because spaces like that, in my view, in a work environment should not exist. They shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be okay for that to happen.
No.
And it must be all over the place. Well, we know it's all over the place. I think what worries me is that, and don't take it the wrong way, but you come from a world where you work with people with corporates and big companies and workplaces. What about everybody else, Deb? What about everybody else who doesn't work in that world?
Yeah.
What about hospitals where it's too noisy to concentrate? What about schools where staff have appalling lighting to work within that actually causes glare, concentration issues? The kids kick off, that causes more stress. What about that?
I thought about this, it was at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know whether anybody remembers. It was a bit of a rant on the radio from somebody called Dr. Jack. And it was amazing. It had me in tears. It was, he was talking about we don't want claps. We want somewhere. We don't want people standing on the street at 8 p.m. on a Thursday evening clapping. We want somewhere to have a break.
Yeah.
We want some decent working conditions. And they didn't have this. And it is such a pity. And it's something that, we are very aware of. Why is it just office workers that we are trying to support?
It's absolutely atrocious. And I cannot tell you how difficult it is for me to get stuff onto Work in Mind for any other sector other than offices. It's absolutely, beggars belief.
Why is that?
I don't know. Because, every kind of workplace has people, doesn't it? And it doesn't matter whether you're, back in that factory, whether you're working in construction, whether you're working in a hospital, we all deserve spaces that are in tune and symbiotic, whatever the right word is, with our well-being. We did I'll tell you one of the most popular articles we ever ran on Work in Mind in the early days was about mental well-being in the construction sector. And I don't need to tell you, the level of suicide, the level of mental health issues in the construction sector is absolutely beyond belief. I don't have the specific numbers to hand, but I can tell you it doesn't take much Googling and it will make your stomach leap with horror. We ran an article about the use of a colour called Baker Miller Pink. Have you ever come across it?
No.
Yeah,
I'll look
it up. So Baker Miller Pink, and it is a particular tone of pink paint, and believe it or not, I think it was somebody like, I'm trying to think of the construction company, we'll come back to that. It's on Work in Mind, guys, go and find it. But it's basically a construction company used this particular colour of pink in the restroom areas, the sort of like the breakout rooms. They have another name I think they use, to bring down the stress reactions, those what they call them, parasympathetic, is it? I know, Deb, you're the clever one, I'm not. But those kind of like nervous system level, those stress responses for those guys and girls, mostly guys, I have to tell you, at lunchtimes, at rest areas. And there was, whilst they might have looked at it and gone, oh, pink room, not Lincoln sitting in there, but actually it was bringing their responses down and it was measured, and it's a very well-known thing. And that got phenomenal interest through Work in Mind. But we have covered quite a bit of stuff on hospitals and on nurses in particular, and how do you deliver better spaces for nurses for those kind of breakout areas, that kind of thing. So I think it's imperative, and I'd say if anybody's out there kind of listening who can offer me some thinking on that, how do we make sure that all kinds of workplaces are covered? It is not okay that just because you work in an office that you're looked after. It's just not okay. So I'm a big fan. I've got a background in my past life in sort of industrial technology marketing, so I've spent a lot of my life in factories, and it's people who work in those environments deserve better quite often.
Yeah. We've been thinking about so the logistics industry is expanding rapidly as well, and we've been thinking about their working conditions, their breakouts.
Lighting, Deb, is a really massive thing in warehousing and logistics. Huge. It has an enormous impact. Lighting is massively misunderstood, massively underrepresented as a topic. I'm sorry, I was totally cutting across you, but the UK warehousing sector, logistics sector, one of those real big drivers for well-being change, positive change, is actually better lights. Those dreadful, inefficient sodium lamps and fluorescent lamps, they're disgusting for human health, actually.
Yeah. Interesting, the one in lighting. So we obviously work with clients across a lot of industries, but it's offices. And it's one of the things that, as I've said earlier, we try and get them to think about the basics, first of all, light and air and space. It's one of those things that it needs a bit more investment. And when we actually get to the costing of it, then quite a lot of businesses just don't want to go there. What can we say to them?
Easy. It's all about, well, if they won't pay for it because of people, they'll pay for it because of carbon. So LED lighting will deliver a sort of 75% saving on a traditional, incandescent lamp, for example. Okay. So, I think this is with my marketing hat on, but you just have to find the thing that clicks the button, really. Carbon and net zero journeys are the thing that are driving every business right now. We could do an entire podcast about that on next week. So that's the thing that's really driving agendas, and it's a cost thing as well, and it's about reputation and what have you. So, I would say that if you look at just about every building service thing, tech that you could put into a space, okay, there will be, and that's really takes us right back to, beginning of our conversation, there will be a human benefit that is relatable to that sustainability investment. So better aircon, more efficient aircon, guess what? We could get some better performance in our room, with lower CO2 concentrations, whatever. LED lighting, really good, efficient lighting, well-designed lighting. We're going to get a cost benefit, a carbon benefit, and guess what? People with no headaches, better performance, whatever. So do you see what I mean? So you find the thing.
Yeah,
make it sound easy.
Yeah, no, I mean, in health psychology, we think about time perspective is a really important one.
Okay.
So, and I think maybe that is something that we can apply with our clients and to encourage businesses.
What does that mean?
So time perspective. So the idea is it's about gains and losses and tangible benefits. So it seems like when we're saying to clients, well, you need to do this because of this, they can't, if that benefit is too far off, then they're not going to bother doing it. Whereas if there's some instant benefit, it's a bit like putting in solar panels and you're told that over 20 years you might recoup your money. Now, 20 years for a lot of people is just too long. Whereas if you told them within a year you could get back your £20,000, then they're much more likely to go for it.
Well, I'll tell you what's really interesting about that is that in the sustainability world and sustainable buildings world, if you look at things like lighting, aircon, more efficient ways of running your building, anybody who has an ROI, return on investment, of more than about 18 months, 2 years, possibly 2.5, they get there is no chance of selling whatever it is you're trying to sell, that building owner, building manager, because nobody wants to commit to anything that's not delivering on that return on investment quickly. And I think what's interesting is that when we're looking at people and things that would benefit people, we have to somehow find, well, it goes back to our conversation about data, doesn't it? We need to be able to show the ROI, the proof, more swiftly. And I think somebody somewhere needs to do some work on the math, basically. I'm no good at math, so don't get me to do it.
Yeah, maybe it's all about the numbers. So this is your Greta Thunberg moment. What do you say to businesses in that really, in that all-encompassing statement that everybody remembers?
Well, thanks for that. And this is the bit that's going to get edited heavily, isn't it? Because it'll get the ums and the ahs. I think my big thing really, Deb, is very simple, is to think holistically about everything that happens in the buildings and the spaces in which you expect people to operate and work and wherever those might be, and probably to get a piece of A4 paper and to draw out all the things on that piece of paper that influence and have an opportunity to influence our well-being, mental and physical. And just look at that picture and see how it knits together. And I think you'll be very surprised. I don't think it's all about spending crazy money. I really don't. I think it's about being sensible. I'm a very pragmatic person. I just think you need to apply the time and you need to have an open mind. an open mind. There you go.
Yeah.
There's your soundbite, Deb.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And let's go back to health psychology because it's my thing.
Oh, gosh.
In health psychology, quite broadly, we talk about quality of life. Mm-hmm. As we we can apply that to work. There's this concept called quality of work life. Have you heard of that? And do you think that makes sense to think about it in academic terms?
Well, I don't know, really. That's so intelligent. I'm struggling with that one. I think that, for me, it's more about a more holistic approach. I'd rather people looked at quality of life in general and then thought about the things that might improve that quality in a more holistic way. I'm not sure that I like the idea of a separate thing for work. I just don't, it doesn't really kind of knit together with me. What's your view?
No, I agree in a way, and I think that so this was something that was developed maybe sort of, I think I first heard of it a few years ago, but now with the whole concept of work-life balance has been thrown up in the air, hasn't it? Some people say that since being able to work from home, they've got a much better work-life balance. However, in my view, they're now totally merged. And in which case, the quality of work life doesn't make much sense. It's just quality of work.
I think this whole blended thing is really problematic. And I suppose it's very difficult. Actually, what I should probably be saying is we're all individual and we all have individual responses to how we feel about it. For me personally, I have had to come to terms with the fact that whilst I thought I had a maverick personality and had a sort of a slightly creative personality, I clearly am the most boring person in the world who actually likes going to an office and driving home and then, talking to my loved ones about what kind of day I've had and who I've spoken to and what flavour of sandwich I ate. Those little boring things actually were very important for me, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And, it's funny, I was in the car going somewhere this week and it made me realise how necessary that space of being able to just, it sounds terrible, readers, but to zone out, to be able to have space in between interactions and conversations and meetings and emails and things. And at the moment, we're just chucking ourselves into everything. We're saying yes to everything. Or I think so many of us are. I know I am. You're knackered. You're mentally knackered. I don't know about how you feel about it. But that blend of just not getting that separation, for me, it's dreadful. And I was very, I've had to make sure that I was able to come back into my main office, safely, I hasten to add. But for others, probably different. I think where all these things get really difficult, and you are the expert on this, not me, is about having you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to any of this, can you?
No.
And for an employer, that's a nightmare, I think.
Yeah, we've really entered into the era of the individual, and we have, there are so many opposing views. People love working from home. People hate working from home. People feel that they've got good work-life balance. Some people feel that they've got no balance at all because they don't have those boundaries and they don't have that break. Yeah, fascinating times. So if we do this podcast in 25 years...
I should be retired, but carry on.
Yeah, if we were to redo this podcast in 25 years, what would we be talking about?
Probably my pension and my retirement home. What would we be talking about? Gosh, the future scan. I sincerely hope we're not talking about the same stuff. That's for a start. I don't know. I am so concerned about the now that I can't even imagine what that future looks like. How was it? I suppose we were all plodding around wearing bowler hats, weren't we? Sort of 40, 50 years ago, or I don't know, Deb. I don't know how to answer that in a way that's suitably intelligent, except to say that I suspect that a lot of the same things will still exist. Where I hope that there are massive shifts and improvements is around the way that we think about buildings in a more holistic way, in a people-centric way.
Yeah.
And I sincerely hope that we can feel safe in our buildings and our built environments, and that all that is in place, and that we never want again, if there's another pandemic, for example, that we never again feel that we are vulnerable in the spaces that we are expected to be in. I find that, deeply worrying, if I'm honest. I think it will hold back, productivity and progress unless we resolve those neuroses and anxieties. So, yeah, I'm not sure that answers your question, but it gives you a start.
No, it does. And maybe it doesn't seem right to think about the future when we've still got so much to do here. We can't move on until we've sorted things out, first of all.
I think so. I think we're in a state of flux, and you've already sort of said that. I think it's difficult to see the wood for the trees a little bit at the moment, and I think things need to settle down. And then I guess we see where we sail off to, don't we?
Yeah. Well, that was really enjoyable. Thank you. We've put the worlds to right, or just started to. So thank you very much.
Oh, well, thanks. It was lovely to talk to you.